could run this webinar today on conducting systematic literature reviews. It's fantastic to see so many faces on the screen, photographs. We've got about 38 to 40 people joining us, so that shows us a lot of interest around the faculty in this particular topic. So thank you very much to those of you who are joining us, and thanks also very much to our presenters, because we put this together in a relatively short period of time. But one of the things that we were thinking about is, as you're working from home, the difficulties of collecting face-to-face data obviously is a challenge. And so we're thinking about alternatives that people can use if they're going to progress their research, ways of being able to build up the research that they're doing. And one of those particular approaches that you can use is thinking about a systematic literature review. And I know many of us in the faculty are already familiar with conducting literature reviews, but we thought it would be a useful thing to revisit, and also to help kind of reskill ourselves in those and think about ways in which we might be able to capitalise on this opportunity of being at home for doing this kind of work. So we also know that literature, these systematic literature reviews, can be very influential in the field. So publishing something like this can be really important in terms of being able to mark out the work that is being done and the possible research opportunities. So citations can be quite high with this kind of publication as well, although they are quite complicated and difficult things to produce if you're going to produce something of high quality for publication. And that's exactly why we have our speakers here today, to be able to help us to think through some of their experiences and also talk about some of those processes involved. So we're really fortunate to have Greg Ruble from the library with some of his team, who are going to talk through about the processes of literature searching, organising, analysing findings, etc. And then we've invited 3 of our faculty members who have experience in putting together successful reviews to talk about different aspects from their perspectives. One of them, Rebecca Cooper, who has just published a systematic literature review. It's just been accepted with a large team, including a number of universities and international colleagues. So what do you do when you're working with a large team? We have Kate de Bruin, who published her systematic literature review as an PCR, so thinking this is not just something that is located with experienced academics and her experiences. And then we've asked Andrea Rupert to comment on the ways in which the field can shape the way, how you put together one of these reviews, because there's different expectations across different disciplinary fields. And again, as a successful publisher in this field, Andrea can share her experiences. So we'll work through those presentations. If you have questions as the presentations are going along, put them into the chat box on the side, and then Sharon can collate those and we can make them part of the Q&A at the end, as well as having other Q&A that you might want to raise in the 10 minutes that we have the final section of this particular meeting. And just a couple of reminders, if you can make sure that you're on mute. And it may be that if you don't have a great internet connection, it's easier for you just to put up a photograph of yourself, no video, rather than presentation. So with that introduction, I'm really pleased and thankful that Greg has agreed to present with the library on our first part of this presentation on actually the process of systematic literature reviews. So over to you, Greg.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Ruble, and I coordinate a team of subject librarians and learning skills advisors who are devoted to supporting the Faculty of Education. And that team includes Tracy White, Susie Phillips, and Janice Pinder, who are with me here today, and they'll each have something to share with you. Because time is precious, I'm going to get straight into our topic. So I just wanted to say from the start, whether you're a seasoned researcher, an early career academic, or a PhD student, systematic reviews are one of the best ways to raise your profile and also impact the course of research and practice in your field. The methodology behind systematic reviews, as many of you probably already know, but for those that don't, it's highly valued in a broad range of disciplines, precisely because it allows us to do several important things. Consolidate the existing evidence around a particular question, produce more accurate assessments of that evidence, and then identify critical gaps in knowledge. So the library was asked to prepare just a short presentation today on the process by which systematic reviews are conducted, but equally important, how the library is actually set up to support your work in this particular area. So our goal today is just offer some distilled information that we hope will stimulate some questions, some of which we might be able to answer today, but others we are more than happy to follow up with you individually outside this seminar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy White, who's going to start talking about the process from the subject librarian side of things. So Tracy, whenever you're ready, if you want to share your screen, you can take it away. Are you there, Tracy?
Oh, that's okay.
I was muted. That's why you can't hear me. I'm just about to share my screen. So if I can find the right screen. Okay, I'm just going to share this screen and then I'll have to change it to the right one. So apologies for that. Hopefully everyone can see the screen now. And Susie's actually going to start.
I am. Hello. Thank you, Tracy. Hi. This slide, as you can see, just outlines quite briefly the systematic review process. It can also be quite useful to have a look at the PRISMA reporting standards for an overview of what you need to do. So each of the stages are sort of briefly outlined here. Question, search, assess, extract, and analyze, which are mostly talking about screening and appraising and managing your data, and then reporting. The library can help with resources and tools for each of these stages, but today we're just going to focus mainly on the searching and reporting elements. Tracy, could you? Yeah, thank you. So I'm not going to talk too much about developing the question, but it is worth noting that it's important to construct a clear and focused question so that you can develop specific search parameters that will meet that. Some of the frameworks we've got listed here, Pico, Eclipse, Spider, and Splice, mostly based in the health disciplines, but they are really useful at helping you clarify and specify your question. The other thing it's useful to do is to have a look at the possibility of an existing review on Campbell Calibration or Prospero, and even similar reviews can be quite useful in beginning your data generation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing you really need to do is develop your search protocol. Once you've got your question sort of more or less outlined, although that may be a bit of a work in progress as you go. So you need to think about your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So this is really important to help eliminate personal biases. And it's really important that you have a clear inclusion and exclusion criteria established before you run your final search. And this involves things like language, scope, sort of international or national, publication dates, population, data types. And all of these choices need to be justified in your documentation. It's really useful to do a scoping search to begin with and develop a sample set or a gold set of maybe, say, 10 articles that are highly relevant to your question. And you can use these in a number of ways. They can be used to develop keywords and subject headings. They can be used to help you establish your criteria, your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And they can be used to test your searches. So when you do a search, you can test, and if the articles aren't coming up, then clearly you need to work on the search a little bit more. You also need to think about where you're going to search. So what databases? Are you going to look at grey literature? Are you going to contact experts? Are you going to hand search recent volumes of journals, citation tracking, things like that? What tools you're going to use? Are you going to use EndNote to manage references? Are you going to use Covidence or Rayon for your screening and extraction and collaboration as well if it's a group project? And are you going to register your review? So Campbell and Prospero, for example, you can register your review there, and this increases transparency. It reduces bias through establishing preset criteria. And places like Prospero, for example, only accept reviews where the data extraction has not started yet, so to help eliminate bias. So you need to think about that in advance. I'm going to hand over to Tracy now because she's going to go into a bit more depth about the searching process itself.
Thanks, Susie. That's great. Oops. So I'm just going to talk briefly about where to search and then a bit more about the process and show an example of a search strategy. So you can see on this mind map, there's some options here in terms of databases and approaches that you may want to use when you're preparing for your systematic review. This mind map isn't meant to be too comprehensive. I've just selected some of the popular education databases, some of the systematic review databases that you might want to consult, and some of the other databases that you may want to include in your traditional searching or perhaps for the citation searching. So the aim is obviously when you're searching to be comprehensive, to use a combination of traditional databases and other methods or approaches to assist you when you're creating the systematic review. I should say that these databases are available from the library databases page, and you can access these with your username and password. And if I just talk briefly about the other methods and resources, so you can see a number of those. Susie's already mentioned these previously, but just to say that there is a grey literature library guide available that library staff have created, and it's really useful if you want to consult in thinking about using grey literature and evaluating grey literature. I just want to say that most published systematic reviews will include their documentation, the databases used and the approaches that they've used in the publishing of, when they're publishing the systematic review, and also to say that the appendices can be, the search strategy can be found in the appendices. I said that the wrong way around. So if you want to look at published systematic reviews, you might see the appendices showing the search strategies. And sorry, I'm going the wrong way again. So just to talk briefly about the search strategy. So this example is taken from Campbell's Systematic Review. It's a journal, and this is a systematic review published in that journal, obviously. And this is a snippet of a search strategy within that. So you can see within that there are searches within the lines or sets, and you can see some results next to the searches. Sometimes you don't necessarily see the results, but the appendices will have the searches in them. So you can see that the sets have combinations of terms within that are combined, and you can also combine the sets as well when you're searching. So there's some examples there of some of the features that they've used, the quotation marks for phrasing, truncation for the endings of words, Boolean operators to combine the synonyms, and also proximity operators. So there's a number of methods that you can use based on when you're searching. So you think about your terms that you want to find information out about, and you create synonyms to broaden the search. You may include phrases or subject terms as well as part of the search, or a combination of those, depending on what retrieves the best results. And then you'll use the methods and features of the database. So some of those things might be included here, like proximity operators for words that need to be within a certain number of words, truncation, wildcards if there's variations in spelling, and you may also need to do field searching and limit to title and author. So there's a number of methods that you can use, and obviously it's dependent on the particular database that you're using. This is an example of a ProQuest database, but they may vary depending on which database you're using. So most researchers conducting systematic review would perfect their search strategy in one database, and then they may need to adapt or translate that to another database, because there are different methods depending on which database you're using. So you can find about how to do all of this using the help screens within the databases themselves. We've also included some links at the end of this presentation, and obviously you can talk to Susie or myself if you've got queries about your particular search strategy. So just wanted to mention those things. Most people, as I said, test in one database and then perfect it, and then they may need to translate to another database. So you can test that as many times as you like, and then eventually you'll run the systematic review and prepare for that. So the usual practice is to record the search results for all the databases and methods that you've used in retrieving the articles, both from the databases and other methods. And then you'll remove duplicates and screen these titles. And many researchers use software, as Susie's already talked about. So just to segue to the next part of the presentation. So after completing the search process, as I've described, the sources retrieved will be reviewed and appraised or assessed, and the data analysed. And Jan's now going to talk about the reporting process and presenting the findings. So I'm going to stop the share and hopefully Jan can pick up the next section. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks, Tracy. Just share now.
Are you okay there, Janice?
Yes, I'm just getting the screen. There was a little bit of a hiccup in the process, in the sharing process, but I think we should be there now. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the reporting of the literature review, and so I'm fully aware that you're all researchers and your business is writing about the research that you do. So I'm not really talking about the writing of it in a great deal of detail, just offering a few thoughts and some resources you can refer to as you put your review article together. So there are these three important points, I think, and in a way they're things that they're points that apply to any piece of writing you do for publication, I guess. One is knowing what the formal requirements are. One is seeing how it's been done by other people, so that you have a sense of the shape of what you're aiming for. And the other is getting feedback as you develop your draft. So,
oops, I think we have.
when it comes to thesis, which was to contextualize the research you were doing, like any other piece of research, it follows the research article structure, sometimes referred to as IMRAT, so this introduction, method, results and discussion structure. So the job is made easier for systematic reviews. It's made easier in some ways than by the existence of guidelines. And so the first of these is, or the most important thing to refer to is the PRISMA checklist, what's referred to as PRISMA, the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. It lists 27 reportable items that can be reported on. So they're helpfully, in the checklist, they're helpfully arranged, as you can see in the illustration there, under the headings of the standard research report headings. Of course, it's always very important also to check the journal that you're intending to publish in, just to see if they have specific instructions. Most journals that publish a lot of systematic reviews refer their authors directly to the PRISMA checklist. This is the example, for example, the case of the review of educational research. And it's probably also, well, it's certainly also advisable to look for information about word limits there, because that may affect the level of detail in the report that you're sending to them. Of course, the challenge is to translate these guidelines into text that fits your particular review, because they're really developed out of reviews that were done in their birthplace, in the clinical sciences. And as this form of knowledge making is taken up in disciplines beyond those, it's asking different kinds of questions and using different kinds of data. So one of the best ways of approaching that is to look at examples of systematic reviews in your field. At the end of this presentation, we've got some resources that are available electronically in the library that you can refer to on writing systematic reviews too. So that's really probably all that I have to say about writing. Of course, the experience of others is a great resource, and we'll be hearing from some other people in the rest of this seminar. And I've no doubt that they'll be reminding us that the writing process itself is one of many drafts, and that it's really important to seek feedback from readers on the way as you work through those drafts. So I will stop sharing now and just hand
Thanks,
back.
Jan. Before you stop sharing, would you just put up the slide with our names on it, please? And I just want to emphasize that for anyone who wants to follow up at the end of this, we'll have these slides made available to you, and you can contact us at any time for individual assistance. So I know that our moderator has given an indication we're running a little behind on our portion here. So we'll go ahead and transition, I think, over to Beth Cooper. So Jan, you can stop sharing.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that.
And then we'll go over to Beth. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks very much. Thanks to Greg and to Tracy and to Janice for that. And now, transitioning from that idea of the process, and thanks very much, because it's difficult to do this within the short period of time. But the great thing is that we have the slides and people can access those. And now what we're going to do is hear some insights from people who have been successful in producing systematic reviews. And Beth Cooper is the first one off the rank here, and as I said, with our large team, including myself, but I'll hand over to Beth to do the presentation.
Thanks, Mandy. Hi, everyone. I realise we're a little bit behind, so I'm going to pick up the pace a bit here, but I am happy to share these slides at the end, and happy for anybody to contact me or Mandy if they've got further questions. It's really great that I think we're going to pick up on a lot of the points that have actually already been made. The paper that Mandy and I are co-authors on with our colleagues was only accepted in April this year, so we're very, very excited and should be out online any day now, really. It's about teacher noticing in science education, and noticing had been quite a big idea within maths education, but we really wanted to have a look and to see where it was with science education and how some of these ideas looked within the science education field. So the purpose of the review was to identify how the teacher noticing construct, which originated in the maths education literature, has been understood and empirically investigated in the field of science education. So thinking about that, our overview of the process, we were a team of 5 international academics working across 4 universities. Our first author, Kennedy Chan from Hong Kong U, really guided the process for us. He was really our leader. And I think that ended up being quite important in the process, is that there was one person who was consistent in kind of leading and overviewing the whole thing. Over a 12-month period, there were 22 meetings held, but I'll get into a bit more detail about perhaps what those meetings look like. Picking up on some of the previous ideas, we did have an initial keyword search through Scopus and Web of Science databases. Consensus eventuated around the criteria for inclusion and exclusion of articles. So we went from initially 1,072 articles to 29 through discussion and coming to consensus around what we would leave in and what we would leave out and why, which formed initially quite a part of those 22 meetings. We worked in groups through the analysis of articles that we divided across those groups. I'm just going to go to the next slide because I think it makes a bit more sense on the next slide. So we divided into groups of 3, but Kennedy, our fearless leader, was in both of those groups. And that became quite important because he was then able to transfer and keep consistency around ideas across both of the groups, because the groups were looking at different sets of articles. So it was a way of breaking those articles up and getting through the analysis. We also came up with a template, which we initially trialled for the analysis of those articles. Once it was agreed upon, this led really well to researcher triangulation. At that stage, once we had gone through those groups of articles using that template, we did come to recognise that there were a couple of more articles that needed to actually be excluded. And they were for many reasons, but we did go through that additional round of what would be in and what would be out. We really used tables to compile our thoughts and to discuss around emergent themes, and I've got an example of that on the next slide. But really our analytic framework was developed through the process. It was iterative. The whole group were involved, and we refined it as we went, as our findings emerged. But I also think as part of that consistency of having Kennedy across both of those groups and sort of having that vision to pull it together, I think was quite important in keeping the focus for what we were trying to do. This will give you some idea of the analysis that we did, where we were perhaps looking for components of teacher noticing, the way teacher noticing was defined, the different context in which teacher noticing was researched in science, what were the artefacts that we used to elicit teacher noticing. And then as you can see, we've just got the articles listed there down the side, and some sense of what was in and what was out. And those tables really formed our analysis. Mandy, is there anything you wanted to add at this stage, or anything I've missed?
No, that's fine. Keep going.
Keep going. Good. Just checking. So using those tables, we actually regrouped the articles based on around ways of conceptualising noticing, which we found was a very important part of what we were doing. Each author was assigned a group, and once we had those groups, each of the authors was assigned a group, summarised the articles in terms of the major research purposes, how researchers defined noticing, the methods used to investigate teacher noticing, and the contribution of to the understanding of science teaching expertise. Author one, so Kennedy, again, brought these summaries together, and that formed the initial draft of our paper that we worked on and took from there and continued to edit. I know it was said before there were many, many drafts. I would agree with that. But that was sort of how we got started and got to the point of having a draft. And it was a really helpful way to do that. Again, Kennedy drove the framework that we wrote to, but it was agreed upon by the team. And through discussion, we identified the main contributions of the article and identified several gaps in the literature for future research lines, which was sort of what we did towards the end once that draft was in a little bit better shape. I'm just seeing there is some questions, but I'm assuming...
Yeah, don't worry, just keep going, Beck.
Keep
Yeah,
going?
the question
Okay.
will be for later.
That's it for us. That's it for us, unless there's anything you want to add, Mandy.
No, that's fine. And I think, you know, this was potentially very challenging to have a very large number of people involved across different institutions and time zones. But I think, as you said, having the guidance and the organisation really, really helped there. So that's great. Thanks, Beck. And as we said, people can ask us more questions, which we're happy to answer. And now if we've got, thanks, Beck, that's great. Do we have Kate with us? Because we're going to shift over to Kate, who also had a published study of a systematic literature review just out of her PhD candidature.
Hi everyone. So just get my screen ready to share.
Okay.
Other people's presentations have been a lot prettier than mine. Is everybody seeing the full version of my slides? Hello?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, no, not actually. It's, you need to go to share screen or.
I have, but it takes me out of the Zoom meeting.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yep, that's fine.
So are you seeing the full version? Are you seeing, I'm not sure whether you're seeing what I'm seeing.
Now we're seeing the whole PowerPoint organisation, but that's fine. We can see enough. That will help us. Yeah.
Okay. So I was asked to share some of the lessons that I learned and how I conducted my systematic review, which was part of my thesis. And so this is it. It's now a bit dated. It's from 2013. And I actually turned my systematic review into a meta-analysis. So some of the advice and tips I'll be sharing with you relate to doing a meta-analysis. But of course, that's just a specific variant of a systematic review. So some of the advice covers both. So thinking about targeting a journal, the first thing I did was think about the SNP of the journal. Is this a journal I really want to be dealing with? Is this on the faculty's preferred list? Is this, you know, a good journal? Another piece of advice that I would have is to think about your audience. So when you're doing a systematic review, what's the region that you're drawing research from? Is this everything only published in English? Is it from a particular continent? Would this be better pitched to a British journal or a European journal or an American journal? Another is whether to take a discipline focus or whether to think about broader readership. So I was originally thinking of taking a discipline focus. It was one of the autism journals that I was looking at, but in the end, it wasn't possible, and that was because of the word length of the and the scope and the breadth of my review. And this led to a consideration of whether to split my systematic review. Was I perhaps undertaking two possibly separate systematic reviews? And so that's something that I think is worth everybody considering, is how wide and broad is broad enough and deep enough? And if you're going to take that approach, are you going to be able to do that within the very tight word limits of some of the journals? So in my case, I ended up pitching it to the Review of Educational Research, mostly because they had the longest word length. And that then led to a discussion of, is this the right journal? Because are my interlocutors actually from this readership? Am I citing from this journal? Is this going to be relevant to their readers? So these were all really, this was an iterative process. And I said, well, I'm not currently citing from this journal. Should I be citing from this journal? And I went back and reconsidered the kinds of information that I'd put in the front end and the journals and the authors that I was citing. In terms of understanding the genre, so obviously there's been some really good advice shared today about understanding the genre. I developed my understanding of the genre by, first of all, just reading a lot of other syntheses. I got a fairly good understanding of the genre also from the kinds of checklists, but Prisma isn't the only checklist. You know, there are others, because Prisma really is just dealing with the reporting, but understanding the genre is understanding how to go about doing it from the front end. And I got a lot of that information from technical assistance manuals. I looked at an enormous number of them, and I selected for my own review the What Works Clearinghouse, because it was the only manual that provided technical guidance and advice for the very specific and narrow requirements that I had regarding the research methodology. That was, so I limited my meta-analysis to only studies using a particular methodology. So it may well be that you want to think carefully about the kinds of manuals that you use to conduct yours. There's there's the Epicenter, there's the Joanna Briggs Institute. There's a huge number of manuals available freely in the public domain. Joanna Briggs Institute is a really fantastic one, and for anyone thinking about doing this, I'd highly recommend that one. The other thing that I did to understand the genre was I actually read a large amount of research on quality in systematic reviews and meta-analyses, because they gave a really deep understanding to me of what are some of the pitfalls, what are some of the ways people misuse terminology or approaches, what are some of the gaps when research is done poorly. I can't emphasize enough how useful that was. As Beck said, there's a huge number of tables and flowcharts that go into preparing the manuscript. And for me, so here's an example of how I started to make sense of what was shared and what was different about the different studies that I was reviewing. I had tables and flowcharts to record what I'd read. I had tables and flowcharts that recorded the sequence of how I applied my inclusionary criteria and what made it in and what got thrown out. I had tables and flowcharts about how I'd refined things. So one of the things that I did that I felt was very important was to get a second set of eyes across all the decisions that I'd made, which applied to applying the inclusionary criteria, as well as a number of things to do with the research method itself. So by having those tables in a very clear and cogent kind of layout, I was able to get somebody else to come in and check that the decisions that I'd made had a high agreement with the decisions that they made using the same table. So preparing the manuscript, I would advise you to use other reviews as a model. If after you've developed your understanding of the genre and after you've developed your understanding of some of the pitfalls that people might fall into when they do this, I narrowed it down to a few reviews that I thought had done this particularly well. And sometimes they had particular subsections that they'd done very well. So they might have written very elegant introductions or, you know, methodology sections. So I had a few that I used as reference. And while I drew on those technical manuals and those, you know, preferred reporting items, I kept above all in my head the mantra that what you do has to be transparent and replicable. So if you're doing something that seems a bit hard or a quirky take on any of those, you know, manualized advice, keep uppermost in your mind, is it clear what I'm doing and why? Could somebody else do this? I sought critical feedback, and shout out to Beck Cooper, who was on my critical feedback team. And finally, in preparing the manuscript, of course, it's often an iterative process. Mine took 2 years. So be prepared for the long haul sometimes. I got really varied feedback, as can happen with reviewers. And some of it, there seemed to be a subtext, which the reviewer may have been saying, we don't think this is possible. So, and it felt as if some of the requests they made of me in revisions were not possible. One of them suggested that I needed to review everything that had been written in every language and included grey and published literature. So in rejecting that suggestion, I had to come up with a strong rationale, and I sought excellent advice from other academics, as well as the fantastic library staff who've shared their insights with you today. So tips from me. The first tip is save your searches. You will need to run them again. It's much easier to update a search if you've saved it. I can't emphasize enough how important it is, I think, to read research about quality in these kinds of reviews. But finally, I just want to say that be brave, dream big. This is definitely possible. If I did it, you can.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. That's really great. And I think this is called clapping now. Is that right? And showing that. Thank you very much, Beck, and thanks very much, Kate. And now we're going to hand over to Andrea, if you're there. Thanks.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute myself. I thought I was all ready, firing to go, but no. Okay. So thank you for the preceding speakers. A lot of what I have to say really confirms everything that other people have said. I want to first just acknowledge country and pay my respect to the traditional custodians of the lands. What I'm talking about is, or what I've been asked to present briefly on, is how does the field shape the requirements of a systematic review? And I really struggled with it, and I'll tell you why I struggled. And this has taken me much longer to prepare than what it should, but I'll explain why. But I think the first thing for me, when I think about a systematic review, and I've done quite a few of them and I really enjoy them, they really appeal to my sense of order sitting at my desk and thinking through things. But I think that the key thing, what should be driving a systematic review, is considering what's an important issue in my field right now, and how can I make a difference. So if I think of a topic or a question, that could well be a really important topic I do a systematic review on, even if there's no definitive answer, but at least I'm drawing a line, bringing together the best evidence or the best research in that field, and making some sort of comment about where the field is here. So some of the questions I like to ask around that are, will this make an impact? Can it be used, and by whom can it use? Because that will really shape what I do and to whom it's pitched. Who cares about the answer? How will it contribute to the field? And is it a strategic thing to do? Even if it's not particularly pertinent at the minute, is it going to be? Is it something that you really want to make very clear to people that need to know? And an example of that, I suppose, is a systematic review that we published only last year. And this is an epidemiological, so we were really trying to draw a line in the sand. This is the number of young people in these families. And it was published last year, and it's already been cited. I was going to check again this morning, but it's been cited more than 25 times. So it's an important topic. It's a hot topic. It's one that says this is the problem, if you like. So one big thing that drives, I think, the systematic review is, what's the topic? What are you focusing on? Now, how do you find that out? Well, governments may well tell you, you can obviously find out what that topic is from policy documents, but they may well also pay you to do that. So I've been involved in 3 literature reviews that have been brokered by the Sachs Institute. So the Sachs Institute is a brokerage for, the ones I've been involved in were the New South Wales Ministry of Health, Beyond Blue, and Victorian Education Department. So those departments contact Sachs, who then tender for an external body to come up with generally a rapid review. And an example of that is this one here that was led by Emily Berger and was also conducted with Kellyanne Allen. So that's a neat example of fitting the requirements of the field. Like, we're actually doing what governments are saying is really important. The other part of that, I think, is the field shapes who you include on your team. So if I think about a topic and it's an important international topic, I will go to my collaborators through the Prado initiative, which we meet every 2 years at Prado. It's an international group. It's on topic. They form my international group of collaborators for many of these projects. The other group that I work a lot with and I learn a lot from are my PhD co-supervisors and students. So I know at the minute I'm working with all those supervisors, and the nature of a PhD project is often that they are building on what's currently out there. So it's a neat way, I think, to start their project is a systematic literature review, because they're actually finding out what the gaps are, what the limitations, what the quality of the evidence is, and so on. Every time I do one of these, I learn more, and my co-supervisors are equally expert in this area. And this is just an example of a systematic review that we did with Natasha Marston, who is a former PhD student, with a group of international people. The pleasure of having international collaborators is that the language inclusion then is much broader. So for that one, we were able to include Dutch, Norwegian, French, German, and so on. So that was obviously important. Your review will also be informed by journal requirements and readership, and that's exactly what Kate has already talked about. So how you write your review will depend on who it's for and the journal that it's in. I, again, like Kate and Becca, I learn a lot by reading other people's reviews, and that really informs what I do and how I do it. The type of review is also determined generally by the field as well. There's lots of different reviews. Government's preferred rapid reviews, which they're really just systematic reviews done really quickly. But increasingly I'm finding that real synthesis is something that I think governments are really interested in, because they look not just what the evidence is, but the mechanisms behind how things work. But there's lots of different types of review that will be dictated by the questions formed and who's asking the question. I think getting back to why I struggled with this, you know, how does the field shape your review? For me, I think it's the question the other way around. I think systematic reviews have the potential to really shape the field. And I know from my experience that they've been used to inform practice guidelines, policy and systems change, and really shape other people's research. So, and you see that in citation hits and so on. And an example of that is this was another SACS review that was commissioned by the New South Wales Department of Health. That we looked at parenting and how that was incorporated in recovery. It sort of doesn't matter so much about the topic, but that was done in 2015, and that was hugely influential in the current draft recovery document from New South Wales Health. So for me, it's an iterative process. If I'm trying to think of where I'm best going to draw the line in terms of what I do and how, a systematic review is a great way of being able to say, I'm an expert in this field. This is how I can contribute, and this is where the rubber hits the sand. So I know just recently I submitted a tender for a project, and they actually asked, what systematic reviews have you conducted in the field? I didn't get the project, but it's still indicative of this is really important, because you're putting yourself out there as, at this point of time, I know everything there is to know, including the gaps and holes. So that's it from me. I'll stop sharing the screen.
That's super, Andrea. Thanks very much. That's a really nice, looking across all of the presentations, I think it helps us to see kind of in a holistic way some of the issues that people grapple with and some of the processes that you go through. And I know for us, it was about trying to scoop up a beginning field around teacher noticing. Something had been well established in another field and was starting in a different disciplinary area, and could we scoop up what was happening and start to see how are researchers taking this up, and could we provide some directions for research? So that sort of feeds into the idea of both like getting on when a field is getting started, and also thinking about long established areas as well and how you can put that work together. That's really, really helpful. Thank you very much. You did mention rapid reviews a couple of times, and I know we've got Connie with us, and Connie is in the process of putting together a rapid review right now. So I'm wondering if, Connie, you could just tell us, you know, for a minute or so, what it is that, you know, because what is a rapid review? Andrea started to mention that, just from your perspective, and what are you doing it around at the moment?
Sure. Rapid review in 1 minute or less.
Yeah.
So it's a really brief systematic review, and as suggested by Andrea, governments like it because it's not meant to be an exhaustive, report on the literature, more like information to help inform an initiative or a program, or, you know, the direction of a program. So that is the purpose, and it's done, they say, in 4 to 16 weeks. Now, what we're using it for, we've undertaken a very large and extensive cross-sector systematic review in the Q project in year 1. So we were going through over 10,000 records to start off with and using Covidence to screen. So that was very, very onerous. For this one, we are looking at understanding best practices, we'll say, in professional learning. This is a new field for me, so forgive me if I'm using all the wrong terms and all the wrong assumptions. What we want to do is just find some information to help guide how we design our professional learning next year into the program. So nothing, again, systematic or exhaustive that we're going to produce. Saying that, rapid reviews focus on systematic reviews or similar almost exclusively. So it really is a review of reviews. So that's what I'll share for now. I have shared some initial resources with Mandy, and I'm happy to share that with the group. And we just received a rapid review on online learning and teaching that was done by the Education Endowment Foundation. So they crank these out. They have 12 people on their team with incredible expertise, and these may serve as very useful exemplars for the Monash folk.
Great, thank you very much. So you can see, obviously, this is not something that is you take lightly, even in a rapid review situation. Obviously, there's a great deal of preparation and process that goes into it, but we have been thinking about what is possible for people to be doing under these current circumstances, and it may be that there's an area that you see is particularly opportune for a review, and hopefully this kind of information input can help you start thinking about how you might approach that, or how you can refine work that you're already doing. So now we've got a space for people to ask questions, and probably the chat box is a good place, because otherwise it could be hard to, or we can ask people to elaborate their questions once they're in the chat box. Already there's been a couple of questions that have been posed. Just if we go back to some of those to begin with, other people have questions and they'd like to ask particular presenters or generally. Sharon was asking about whether a book chapter can be classified as systematic review and acknowledged as research. Importantly, the research would have to meet the criteria of what research is, and you can use an ARC definition of research there that could be helpful, but it obviously has to be systematic, rigorous, thorough. Whether or not it would be a systematic review, given it's the 4-yearly review of the Maths Education Research Group, it may not meet the criteria of a systematic review, but it may be a review of research that is being developed by these particular teams. So, and the university, Monash University, has a definition of research that we take from the ARC about whether something classifies as research or not. So it would be hard to say. It doesn't sound from what you have written there that it would be a systematic review in the ways that we've been talking about a systematic review, but it may well be a review of research. I hope that is helpful, Sharon. Then we had, oh, sorry.
Yeah, just thank you. That's great. Yeah.
And Connie asked about a quality appraisal tool that we used for finalising included papers. With the particular study that we did, we had nominated particular journals that were top journals in their field, and then we were using those as the basis, but we saw if there were references to particular articles that weren't in that scope, we did consider those articles too, if they met our criteria for inclusion as well. Is that right, Beck? Yep.
Yeah, that sounds pretty. I'm nodding away here because my mic's not unmuting quickly enough. Yes, and I noticed someone mentioned before, one of the librarians, about sometimes hand searching things just to check, which we definitely did, just to really confirm that they were out of scope.
Yeah, and then we chose a date range, and obviously there are things that are going to be published after the time or during the time when you're producing your review, but we decided on that particular date of, I think it was up to December 2018, and everything beforehand.
There are lots of quality assessment tools out there though, and they all have varying levels of usefulness. Joanna Briggs has some, BMJ has one. There's a critical appraisal skills program. I'm just looking at some of the ones I've used in the past, but there's quite a few.
Yeah, okay, great. And it may be for those people who are interested in using those tools, we could run some separate small workshop on how you go about using them if you haven't used them before, because yeah, obviously there's, I'm sure there's tricks and tips that people would need to know about those who are unfamiliar. We have a question to everybody about tactics to prevent bias in keywords or subjects or truncation choices. And Steve's asking, are there, for example, the SORI that would help in such situations? Any of the presenters want to make any comments about that one?
That's a really interesting question. Biases. I suppose it depends on your research question. I'm just looking at what Susan's writing here. But I always defer to my librarian experts. They become my new best friend when I start looking at a search strategy and talk about the search terms, the databases, how I might truncate things, look at other terms that I can use and so on. Look at how other similar reviews, what their search terms are for similar words. Yeah.
I'll say as a librarian, yeah, some databases you can use subject terms, and some of them do have thesauri that you can match terms to, and so that's a way of doing it. But I think in terms of eliminating bias, a lot of it's about having this preset criteria that you use to include or exclude articles. So you're not just including an article because it looks good or you like the results. You're doing it because it fits this preset criteria.
Mm. And some checking of that criteria could also be helpful, some sort of external validation or something of the criteria too. Thanks. There's a question from Sue to everyone. Maybe Sue, would you like to ask it yourself? No.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, I'm engaged in an international systematic review. I think that's what it's called. It's looking at practices around widening participation to try and understand for Australia what works. And the issue really is that once one looks at that kind of thing, one finds that in different countries, different things are the initiatives, so different things get researched, because the policy contexts are very different. And it's been kind of interest to try and decide what to include, what not to include. But even if one tries to include more similar kind of Anglophone types of contexts, there are still very different policy contexts which affect the practices. So although we've got those issues as named within our thematic tables for part of our analysis, I do feel that there's an inbuilt problem of comparing apples and pears and kind of what can one actually say from such a review, because the policy contexts are so different in terms of how you develop practices.
So I'd strongly suggest others might have a different approach as well, but there's a systematic review that will tend to just show, well, not just, but will show you what's out there and some of the features of that. But some of the more nuanced review types, and I'm thinking in particular, Zoe, I'm looking at you because we might be doing this later this year, but is a real synthesis, which looks at context. And so when you do the data extraction, you'd be looking at what's the context, what's the outcome, what are the mechanisms behind those outcomes.
Yeah.
So that might be the type of review that you might be leaning towards. I don't know, Zoe, whether you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah.
I can send you some information on that if you're interested.
That would be great. If you could do, Andrea, that would be really good.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah, and
can I just add something to that?
Okay.
I think it's about how you understand the phenomenon you're researching. In other words, when you can strip away the policy, what are the things that are still left in common? I wrestled with exactly that problem. I was looking at how students with disabilities are provided with more intensive supports when they are included in the regular general education classroom. And policies are so diverse around the world that was a real problem, even to the point of how I could describe what that classroom is.
yeah,
You know, and I published in an American journal and I had to refer to it as a public school classroom because that's a code word in the US for a school without enrollment restrictions. So it is tricky, but when it meant that I had to keep stripping away at what it is that I'm researching and how that's described in the region in which the journal is published. I don't know if that helps.
yeah. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's terrific. And thanks very much, Umesh, for sharing the website with the different resources for systematic reviews. That's great. We're very, very quickly, it seems to me, have come up to our 2 o'clock time. And I really, really appreciate, again, the presenters who are willing to put their time and efforts into this. You can see there's a lot of interest from the faculty. It's great to see all of our colleagues here today as well. I know there's some HDR students who are joining in. And hopefully you've found something here that you can connect to and that's useful for you. Again, you can send any further questions to Sharon and me, and then we can share them with the other members who are presenting and help you wherever it might be relevant. And please don't think of this as the end, think of this as a connection to get started in the exciting work that you want to do following on from this or that you're already engaged in. So stay well, everybody, and lovely to have this opportunity to connect electronically at least, and I hope that's been helpful in guiding you all along. And just a reminder that we're recording this so you can get access to it, and we'll also share the slides with you as well. So thank you again, and I'm going to hit that red button that says leave meeting so you can get on to whatever you're doing next. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.